Call of Duty Black Ops is the best story in the franchise, but it goes even further than that. I think Black Ops is one of the best stories in first-person shooter history. It's thrilling, engaging, and captivating from the opening up until the second the credits roll. But what makes this story so captivating? How does it hook so deeply into the player, making the journey inescapable until its conclusion? It's because Black Ops understands the importance of two things: questions and revelations. We're going to dive deep into the campaign and investigate what makes it so great. In particular, we're going to look at how Black Ops constantly instills new questions in the player, while also steadily giving them revelations. One quick plug before I begin. I'm a science fiction writer myself, so I especially appreciate the hard work that goes into creating a compelling plot. My series, The Northfield Saga, is a post-apocalyptic series focused on a man, Mark Northfield, who is blackmailed into assassinating a target. Little does he know, his target holds the key to saving the world. It would mean a lot if you checked out my novels and supported my dream. A link is in the video description. Ready? Let's declassify this campaign. The storytelling of Black Ops begins before the opening cutscene. The main menu, in fact, is used as a vehicle for the story. The player sees themselves from Alex Mason's perspective, strapped to a chair in a dingy interrogation room. The interrogator barks questions at you about numbers and remembering things.
Focus, Mason. Try to remember.
This main menu segment is actually playable too. By rapidly hitting the triggers, Mason can break out of his chair and wander around the room. In fact, there's even a terminal that you can enter cheat codes into to unlock the Dead Ops arcade. But that's just an aside. What the menu really succeeds at is creating an immediate air of mystery, and it prompts you to ask questions. Who is Mason? Who's interrogating him, and why? I wish more games used their main menus as creatively as Black Ops. It's a great example of how Black Ops uses every tool at its disposal to build suspense. When the campaign begins officially, we stay with Mason in the interrogation room. As questions are drilled into him, we learn a few key things. Our first few revelations. Mason is a former CIA operative. More than an operative, he was in fact an assassin. There's also some broadcast station that the interrogator expects Mason to know of. Numbers also flash across the screen. The interrogator doesn't know what they mean, but he expects Mason to. There's also mention of men named Viktor Reznov and Dragovich. So we have a few details, but we don't really have any idea how they're related. It once more builds that curiosity, because the game is giving you all these questions that you want answers to. The story of Black Ops is an onion. With each level, we slowly peel back layer after layer until we get to the center. The constant infusion of new questions, paired with constant revelations, is what gives this story such a magnetic, almost addictive feel. You want to keep pushing on so you can get answers, but as you get more answers, you get more and more questions. Our interrogator asks about the Bay of Pigs. Mason and his team, composed of Frank Woods and Joseph Bowman, were sent in to kill Castro. Here is where our investigation begins. The mission starts with Mason and his guys in a Cuban bar, going over the plan. Woods and Bowman are the types of guys you'd expect from the CIA. Cool, cold-blooded killers. We see their level composure when they're compromised by Castro's men. They don't freak out, but instead get right down to business. They fight through opposition and escape the bar. There's an interruption. The interrogators are losing Mason, so they shock him. While Mason is seized by pain, numbers scroll across the screen. Here's another detail revealed. The numbers aren't just purely intel that Mason knows about. There seems to be some connection between them and his psyche. We return to the mission. Mason's team infiltrates Castro's compound while their allies provide a distraction at the airfield. They manage to accomplish their mission and take out Castro. All that's left is to escape. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a hitch on their way out. The runway needs to be cleared, otherwise the plane can't take off. Mason jumps off and mans a turret. He shoots away the debris, allowing his guys to escape. There's a cost to his heroism though. Mason is captured by the enemy. When he comes to, he finds himself at the feet of a few men. First is unbelievably Castro himself. But we just killed him, right?
You're dead. We killed you.
No. You killed a double. You think we didn't know of your plan?
We always know.
Here's our first twist in the game. It establishes a few things. First, our enemies are crafty and intelligent, and their planning goes beyond what we expected. Second, and most importantly, it establishes that things in this story are not always as they appear. People are not always who they claim to be. Dragovich is also here. We recognized the name from the interrogation room earlier. This is a perfect example of Black Ops' engaging form of storytelling. The story implicitly sets up questions by name-dropping him in the interrogation room. Who is Dragovich, and what's his connection to Mason? Well, here we get some answers. Dragovich is a communist, allied with the likes of Castro, and he and Mason's connection is first established by Mason's capture in Cuba. But even though we have answers to our initial questions, we're then given a fresh new set of questions. What is Dragovich's plan? To what ends are he and Castro allied? What does he plan on doing with Mason? Why is Mason kept alive? It goes back to what I was saying, where it's this stream of revelations paired with constant questions which makes the narrative so exhilarating. You get this satisfaction of having your curiosity sated right as you're being pulled by the hooks of new questions. We find out where Mason was taken. Vorkuta, a harsh labor camp. Dragovich did things to him, but the details are still vague. In the prison, we get another revelation. We learn of the other man we heard about during interrogation, Viktor Reznov. He's Mason's friend, but he's also punching Mason in the face. Once more, the expectation is being set that people are not always as they first appear in the story. Seeds are being planted. Reznov and Mason are putting on an act to lure a guard in. They take out the guard and grab his keys. Here, their grand plan is set into motion.
Now, we take Vorkuta! What is step 2? Ascend from darkness! 3! Rain fire! 4! Unleash the horde! 5! Skewer the wicked beast!
I played a large portion of this clip because frankly, I just love it. It does such a great job of amping you up for this prison break. You're some grubby guy with a prison shank, but you're joined by your brothers in darkness, rising out of this hellish place for freedom. I mean, especially when we're joined by the likes of our boy Sergey, how can you not get hyped? This is a good time to mention too that this isn't actually Reznov's first appearance in the series. He was a major player in Treyarch's prior game, World at War. The player fought with him against the Nazis in Russia, and he was a well-liked character. This isn't necessary information in Black Ops. If you didn't play World at War, you don't feel like you're missing out. However, for those that did play World at War, Reznov is a character you're already familiar with. He's a character that you like and that you trust. You don't have your guard up, which makes the revelations later in the game more effective. Mason and Reznov fight their way through the prison. In another brilliant stroke, there is a power progression to the gameplay that perfectly matches the narrative. You start off with nothing more than a prison shank, weak, vulnerable, and ineffective. You work your way up to a pistol, which is better, but you're still very much outgunned. Then, as the prison break continues, you get your hands on shotguns and assault rifles. Finally, you end the mission with a minigun, tearing apart your opponents. This progression enhances the narrative feeling of triumph and success, as the plan continues to succeed step by step. Mason and Reznov make it out, but at the very end there's a complication. Only Mason escapes from the prison. Reznov is left behind.
Your turn! Come on! Step 8, Reznov! Freedom! For you, Mason! Not for me! Reznov!
But this is not the last we'll see of our Russian friend. Answers followed by more questions. We know how Mason got out now, but now we're left wondering how Reznov eventually escapes. Mason links back up with the CIA, and he's assigned to Jason Hudson. The government wants Mason to kill Dragovich, but that isn't all.
The government wanted Dragovich. They wanted you to kill him.
Yeah. There were others. Others I was supposed to kill.
Who? Who, Mason?
This line is planting another seed. Mason heads to the Pentagon with Hudson, and here he's given his assignment. When he reaches the Pentagon, he's paranoid. He feels like he's being watched. It's clear that there isn't something quite right about Mason. Something is gnawing at him, and the numbers are in his head bothering him. The interrogator asks if Mason neared his objective. It's clear that he isn't talking about Dragovich. When they reach the nerve center, Reznov's prison plan comes to Mason's mind.
I don't know. It felt like I was in a dream. Step 2. Ascend from darkness. Step 3. Rain fire.
You were getting close to your objective. It was working.
This doesn't really make sense at the moment, but it becomes relevant later. Mason finally meets the president himself, JFK, but his headaches seem to grow even worse. He even seems to hallucinate holding a gun to the president. Or is it a hallucination? Is he the objective that the interrogator is referring to? This Pentagon scene is brilliant. A lot of the elements here don't make sense at the moment, but when looking back at the scene, it's layers upon layers of foreshadowing. I'll go into more detail once those revelations come. JFK goes into the current plan. Mason is tasked with taking out the Russian space program, particularly their long-range missile project. He deploys on the mission with Woods. Unfortunately, there's a complication right away. One of their agents, Weaver, is burned. He is in the hands of Dragovich's second-in-command, Kravchenko. He is immediately established as a cruel, sadistic man as he stabs out Weaver's eye. Woods and Mason disguise themselves and infiltrate the facility. They save Weaver and make their way to the auxiliary control bunker to abort the launch and kill the scientists. Mason, when asked, denies this.
You saved his life. Now you had to locate the Ascension group and kill the scientists.
No, I had to kill Dragovich.
Instead, he insists that his goal is to kill Dragovich, which is not the primary objective he was tasked with. This is another seed being planted. We are starting to see Mason's fixation with killing Dragovich, even at the expense of other objectives. This will continue to intensify throughout the story. They manage to take out the Ascension group, and they find Dragovich's limo. They take the vehicle out, but they don't confirm the kill. This eats at Mason, and he grows obsessed. We see that Mason's motivation isn't merely revenge or anger over what happened to him. Something is in his head compelling him to find Dragovich. Mason is then deployed to Vietnam, once again working under Frank Woods, this time in an SOG group tasked with reconning covert Russian activity. Then the war turns south, and the NVA surrounds Hue City. There's a Russian defector in the MACV compound who has information on Dragovich. The interrogator says that recovering the defector is a lost cause. The NVA burned the compound to the ground, and he is surely dead.
It was a lost cause, and you still went in. Why?
His protection team had gone dark. I couldn't accept that he was dead.
Mason cries out in desperation. He just can't accept that the defector is dead. He needs information on Dragovich, and based on his tone, it feels like his very life depends on it. It's that compulsion rearing its head again. He goes in any way to recover him. The atmosphere of the level goes even further than being war-torn. The Reds, fire, and rubble create a truly apocalyptic sight. This reinforces the interrogator's words and makes you think that nobody could have survived this, including the defector. Despite the ruins and the wreckage, Mason finds the defector alive and well. It's none other than Viktor Reznov. It's a miracle that seems too good to be true. And well, you know what they say about things that are a little too good to be true. Reznov picks up the dossier from a desk. Aside it, there's a body of a man who looks like he could be Russian. I mean, hypothetically, if Reznov wasn't here, then maybe this could be the body of the true defector, who the interrogator said is certainly dead. Hypothetically, of course. Reznov too seems to share the same fixation of killing Dragovich that Mason does.
Dragovich, Kravchenko, Steiner, all must die.
They run into Woods and Bowman outside. If you notice, neither Woods or Bowman actually acknowledges Reznov. However, the dialogue is written in an ambiguous enough way where this may pass by you. Black Ops is brilliant because it lays out all the groundwork for the true explanation for things right in front of your eyes. The true defector, Reznov's fixations being shared by Mason, and Reznov not being acknowledged by anyone else. But this story is still discreet enough where you probably won't notice any of these until you play through the game again. Mason and his allies manage to escape Hue City with dossier in hand. The dossier provides IDs for all of Kravchenko's men. They're masterminds of something called Project Nova, or Nova 6. Mason's handler, Hudson, is sent to capture and interrogate Dr. Clark, the chemical engineer behind Nova 6. He and Weaver nab the scientist, and they get creative with their questioning. Clark is tough-lipped because he thinks he's better off dead anyway. He predicts that Dragovich is on his way too. The engineer is right. Dragovich's thugs arrive at the scene. Gunfire ruptures Nova 6 canisters, buying Hudson and the others an opportunity to escape. The level is a frenetic chase, as the operatives escape Dragovich's men by bounding across rooftops and weaving through buildings. It's one of my favorite levels in the game, as the rainy setting feels straight out of an action movie. The prevalence of dual-wield weapons makes you feel even more like a movie star. We play as Hudson in this mission, and it feels very fitting. He's a cold, calculating man with nerves of pure steel. Above all, he's ruthlessly effective. As their enemies close in, they make a big leap onto an angled roof. Clark loses his grip and Hudson catches him. However, things go south. This is an important discovery for Hudson. The numbers are important. Although Clark died before he could explain further, Hudson knows they are critical to stopping Dragovich. He escapes. There's one other piece of information Clark told Hudson during interrogation. He ID'd a Nazi scientist named Steiner. They are headed to Mount Yamantau. During Mason's interrogation, Mason reflects on when he first heard about Nova 6. His friend Reznov told him during captivity.
Vorkuta. Reznov told me at Vorkuta.
What did he tell you?
Mason, listen to me. It was a long time ago. Far away.
Dragovich, Steiner, Krachenko, all must die.
This phrase has been drilled into us over and over by Reznov. It's sounding less and less like purely a statement of Reznov's own conviction. It sounds like indoctrination. Reznov was deployed to the Arctic Circle to hunt down the last of the Reich. At least that's what he believed. We deploy on the mission in his shoes. Kravchenko and Dragovich are in command, and that doesn't bode well. They instill the need to keep Steiner alive. This is the same scientist as earlier. This creates a lot of tension. Reznov doesn't trust them, not an inch.
What happened in Stalingrad between you and Dragovich?
When the German occupation began, he and his lapdog, Krachenko, left my men and I hopelessly outnumbered. Promises of reinforcements were made, but not kept. Dragovich and Krachenko are opportunists, manipulators. They are not to be trusted, Dmitri.
Dmitry Pevtrenko, Reznov's friend, is actually the playable character from the Russian sections of World at War, so there is a connection here for returning players. We know Reznov was eventually imprisoned for some reason, so a crash course between him and Dragovich seems imminent. They fight through the enemy base, with Dragovich reiterating Steiner's importance. Along the way, Reznov has the opportunity to spare the lives of surrendering enemies, but he offers them no mercy. This feels very in character for Reznov following World at War. He's not the type of man to take his enemies prisoners, not after the hell they wrought in his homeland. They connect with Steiner. Reznov and his friend Petrenko do not trust how buddy-buddy Dragovich is with the German.
Dragovich and Steiner are talking like old friends. I do not like this, Reznov.
Alright, Dmitri. Be on your guard.
Their mission isn't done yet. There is something else Dragovich is after. Nova 6. The tension increases, and the game almost verges on horror as Reznov creeps through dark claustrophobic corridors with his pistol. They find Nova 6, and the imminent betrayal follows. In a twist of sadistic curiosity, Dragovich tests the weapons on his opponents. Among them is Petrenko. Reznov watches his friend die. We as the audience get to witness the dire effects of Nova 6 on its victims. It gives us a grim look into the future if we don't stop Dragovich. This moment has special impact on returning World at War players. Our player character, the person we played as alongside Reznov and bared trial after trial with, dies with the dignity of a 2-cent lab rat. But regardless of the player's familiarity with the past game, the injustice to a loyal soldier here is plain for all to see. We understand why Reznov hates Dragovich and his ilk so much. With Mason's mistreatment in mind too, we're beginning to make quite a list of reasons why the player wants to take Dragovich out. British commandos arrive, who are also after Nova 6. Although they present a threat to Reznov and those loyal to him, they also provide a distraction. Reznov weaves his way through the opposing forces, determined to sink the ship so no side possesses this horrible weapon. Reznov succeeds, at least for now. Despite Reznov's heroism during the war and during this mission, he's still sent to Vorkuta for his transgressions against Dragovich. The interrogator wants to know more about Mason's reunion with Reznov, so they return to Vietnam.
North. We went north. Viet Cong. We were shut down. And Reznov even survived that.
It's funny how Reznov has such a knack for survival. They fight their way out of the crash helicopter, and Reznov splits with them to scout out ahead. Once again, if you're paying close attention, you'll notice that Woods still never acknowledges Reznov's presence. The mission is a fun change of pace. The predators turn prey as Woods and Mason skulk through the river, taking out hostiles quietly. Eventually, Mason and Woods relink with Whiskey, which includes Bowman. Kravchenko has a military compound near the village, and they're going to try and take it. After clearing the village, they uncover a rat tunnel. It needs to be cleared, and Mason volunteers, along with a soldier named Swift. Mason creeps through the tunnels, armed with a flashlight and pistol. It's reminiscent of Reznov's section in the wrecked ship, and it evokes the same horror vibes. You aren't the king of these tunnels. This is the Viet Cong's domain, and you're reminded of that. A familiar face appears, almost taking a bullet. It's Reznov. He's here to help Mason. Reznov's always here to help Mason. He decides to split up and work his way through the tunnels. Abruptly, Swift calls out Mason.
What the fuck's wrong with you?
For a new player, this comment strikes you as strange. What on earth is Swift talking about? Mason didn't do anything wrong. Swift's reaction makes perfect sense in retrospect. It's the story planting another seed, so when the big revelation comes, it's surprising, but it also feels earned. The best twists come when things never quite feel right, and the pieces don't fit together, but the newest revelation makes all the pieces come together. And that's exactly what Black Ops delivers, built upon moments like these. The game pulls another clever little trick here. Immediately after Swift's reaction, he's killed, and the action ramps up. It's highly tense, as Mason is only equipped with his revolver, and he has to contend with the dark tunnels. The player shifts their attention to the burst of action, and because of that, they don't get the opportunity to dwell on Swift's reaction too much. They notice it as an oddity, but they don't get to think about it. Reznov rejoins Mason, and they find out Kravchenko has been performing Nova 6 tests on the local population. As if we needed another reason to find these guys despicable. Kravchenko rigged the tunnels to blow, so Mason makes a desperate escape from the tunnels. This section is claustrophobia-inducing to say the least. They make it out though and are picked up by Woods. The interrogator confirms what Mason learned from the mission, that Kravchenko is operating in Laos and killing people with his experiments. He then warns Mason that Reznov is not to be trusted.
Listen to me carefully, Mason. Reznov cannot be trusted. No matter what he tells you, no matter what he says.
But he gave us the dossier on Clark. He led us to Nova 6.
Reznov's not who you think he is.
No, he's my friend. He helped me escape.
This plants more seeds. It also prompts more questions. Reznov so far has been one of the most trustworthy guys we know. He's helped us more times than we can count, and he hates our enemies even more than we do. Why can't we trust him? What I also love about this section is the preciseness and subtlety of the dialogue. The interrogator speaks about Reznov in the active present voice. This plus the urgency in the interrogator's voice is a bit odd considering Mason's predicament. He's strapped into the chair of some holding cell at the interrogator's mercy. Presumably, the interrogator could make sure that Mason never speaks to Reznov, or anybody else for that matter, ever again. Yet, the interrogator is speaking like Reznov right now may say something to Mason, even though he's alone. It's another oddity, another subtle seed being planted. The interrogator continues Mason's story.
I had to kill him. You understand? I have to kill them all.
Once more, Mason's desire seems more like compulsion at this point than conviction. Mason complains about the numbers. Here we get another big revelation that leads to more questions.
It's a broadcast, Mason. The numbers are a broadcast. You've been brainwashed.
Mason has been brainwashed. The numbers are a broadcast. This naturally leads us to wonder, a broadcast from who? What is it broadcasting? Perhaps above all, to what end was Mason brainwashed? Before Kravchenko can be handled, another mission awaits. A Soviet plane went down with Nova 6, and Mason's SOG team is sent in to recover it. They reach the plane, but the Nova 6 is nowhere to be found. They get the location of Kravchenko's compound at least. Mason seems singularly focused.
Kravchenko, he must die.
Okay, Mason. Let's go.
With the interrogator's revelation in mind, the deadness in which Mason speaks is concerning. He seems compelled to kill Kravchenko. His compulsion we witnessed before wasn't illusory. Mason seems like he has commands that he must follow. Things turn south before Mason's SOG unit can act on that intel. Kravchenko and Dragovich capture them. Mason's unit is presumed KIA, So Hudson continues the search for Nova 6 without them. He heads to the complex in Mount Yamantau. This is where Hudson learns about the numbers. This mission is another interesting change of pace, as you initially take control of a pilot named Mosley. He's in a recon aircraft, and he guides the squad on the ground via commands. It plays somewhat like a very simple strategy game. Perspective periodically switches to the soldiers on the ground as they clear out buildings. It's a unique segment that also doesn't overstay its welcome. Hudson and his guys accomplish their objective of cutting out the complex's comms. Now they can move on to the base itself. I love this mission. The setting and atmosphere are great. As you rappel down the side of the mountain, it feels like something straight out of a James Bond movie. They take down the Comstat and make their way down with an avalanche close behind. They breach the Nova 6 facility. However, they soon discover that Steiner was expecting them.
Targets marked across the states.
All across America, Dragovich has sleeper cells waiting for the signal to release the Nova 6.
Weaponized Nova 6.
The numbers broadcast. What do they
In
mean?
36 hours, the sleeper agents will receive their final orders. Only I can tell you how to stop the broadcast.
Here, at last, Dragovich's grand plan is revealed. We finally understand what the broadcasts are for. They're to awake the sleeper agents and give them their final orders. Hudson and his men fight their way out of the facility with a new objective in mind. They need to reach Steiner. The interrogator reiterates this intel to Mason before we get another piece of intel.
Why the hell do you think that I know where it is?
You're in Vorkuta, Mason. We know what happens in Vorkuta. They programmed you. You can translate the codes.
Now we understand the interrogator's desperation, why he's wasting so much time interrogating Mason and sifting through his memories with a fine-tuned comb. We've learned a lot from this level, but it produces another big question. Hudson and his guys went after Steiner. He seems to know something about the broadcasts. Presumably, the scientists would have all the intel they need. Why do they need Mason so badly? Why does it seem like everything hinges on him? It doesn't quite add up. Not yet. Mason recalls the second time imprisoned by Dragovich. The sadism and brutality of Kravchenko is demonstrated once more, as a Soviet interrogator and the Viet Cong force the Americans to play Russian roulette. Bowman refuses to play, and he's killed for his disobedience. Woods is next. He and Mason are to play until one of them pulls an unlucky trigger. But Mason and Woods aren't willing to die without fighting. Woods alerts Mason when the bullet is in the chamber, and they go on the offensive. A quick, brutal attack which buys them weapons and a chance. They chase and take down the Russian that killed Bowman. Instead of escaping, they go on the offensive. They head to Kravchenko's compound. Inside, they find American POWs. Reznov is among them. Woods wants to get the POWs out, but Mason, like Reznov, is laser focused on killing Kravchenko. The two are always in alignment, it seems, and Mason is willing to prioritize killing Kravchenko above everything else. He reaches Kravchenko's office, and he gets his wish. Kravchenko is killed, but it comes at a cost. Woods is killed, or at least apparently. Mason is all alone. Well, no, not quite. He has Reznov. He always has Reznov.
Dragovich, Kravchenko, Steiner. All must die.
Mason goes rogue. He heads to Rebirth Island to mark another name off his list, Steiner. From Mason's perspective, he was just continuing the mission. But clearly this was the exact opposite of what the CIA wanted.
Dragovich, Kravchenko, Steiner, they all had to die.
We wanted Steiner alive! Why did you have to kill him?
Because the numbers were telling me to!
Another piece falls into place. Another question is answered. The interrogator is so reliant on Mason because Mason killed Steiner, the scientist who had all the answers they needed. Mason fades, and he returns to Rebirth Island. This mission is brilliant. It's rife with tension, and this is due to dramatic irony. We as the audience know that Mason and Reznov are about to do something very bad. Meanwhile, Mason thinks he's doing the right thing, or at the very least, accomplishing his mission. When they break into the laboratory, Hudson overtakes the comms. He's on Rebirth Island too. Despite Hudson's pleas, Mason continues on. Nothing will stop him from accomplishing his mission. Like we saw in Vietnam, when it comes to killing Kravchenko, Dragovich, and Steiner, everything else is forfeit to Mason. He reaches Steiner. The scientist recognizes him. He says that Mason doesn't know what they did to him. Here, the story is prompting more questions. It feels like we have most of this plot figured out, but Steiner is telling us that we still don't understand what's truly going on. The intrigue deepens. Mason lets Reznov take the reins. He deals his punishment to Steiner. Men in hazmat suits arrive. They try to break in through the window as Reznov pulls the trigger. The interrogator doubts Mason's story. It was Mason who killed Steiner, not Reznov. Hudson saw it himself. The story goes back in time. We're in Hudson's shoes. He and Weaver arrived on the opposite end of the island. Once again, there's a ton of tension here because we know how this section is going to end, with a confrontation in Steiner's dead body. Dragovich's thugs deploy Nova 6. Fortunately, Hudson has a hazmat suit, but some of his soldiers aren't so lucky. The gameplay segment here is great. We fight through the hazy toxic gas, and there's a claustrophobic feeling induced by the hazmat suit. Past that, the suit has an effect on gameplay. Instead of a regenerating health system, your mask progressively cracks as you take damage. If you take too much, well, you can say goodbye to breathing. It's really creative, and it makes this combat segment feel fresh. It makes me wish the series played more around with base mechanics like health, while still keeping you in the boots of a soldier on the ground. I feel like most of the gameplay variation in the series is provided by vehicle segments. Eventually, Hudson and Weaver reach the lab. Now we are those guys in hazmat suits, trying to break in while Steiner dies. This time, however, we see a very different sight. There is no Reznov. It's Mason alone confronting Steiner.
It's Victor Reznov, and I will have my revenge! Mason, no!
Mason calls himself Victor Reznov and pulls the trigger. Hudson breaks through, but it's too late. Steiner, their best lead, is dead. Reznov was never there. It's the biggest twist in the game and the biggest revelation. We return to the interrogation room. Before we have much of a chance to breathe, another revelation follows. Our interrogator reveals his identity, but you likely pieced it together yourself by now. It's none other than Hudson, accompanied by Weaver. Hudson drills the revelation into Mason's head.
Reznov's dead, Mason! Did you hear me? He's dead! Weaver's right. We're out of time.
He lets Mason out to establish trust, but Mason isn't willing to accept what Hudson tells him. He strikes his handler and wanders off. In a rush, memories return to Mason.
His responses to our orders have been sporadic, unpredictable. He shows a remarkable resilience.
If he will not follow the orders embedded in the numbers, then he is of no use to me. He can rot. Take him back to his cell.
Dragovich and his goons brainwashed Mason, but he showed remarkable resilience to their orders. Dragovich deemed him unuseful and cast him back into his cell in Vorkuta to rot. But where Dragovich saw failure, Reznov saw opportunity. Reznov counter-programmed Mason, retrofitting him for his revenge quest. Reznov died at Vorkuta, but Mason is his revenge from beyond the grave. This twist is just brilliant. It serves as a genuine eureka moment, as all the oddities throughout the game, all the things that weren't quite explainable, now make perfect sense, both the big things and the little. For instance, this explains why Reznov wanted Mason to escape so badly, prioritizing Mason over his own life. Reznov wants his revenge, but he has no resources left. His government betrayed him, and the Americans certainly won't help him. Mason, on the other hand, is still a US operative, with all the contacts that the job entails. Out of the two men, Mason stands a much better chance of killing his targets. So Reznov lets himself be taken and killed during the escape to let Mason go. The game doesn't need to explain this motivation to us. Reznov's brainwashing of Mason implicitly does that. Likewise, everything that happened during the Pentagon scene comes into clarity. When Hudson said that Mason was nearing his objective, he's referring to Dragovich's attempt to brainwash Mason into killing Kennedy. We see the brainwashing attempt to take root as Mason has images flash through his head of killing Kennedy. But he doesn't do it. Dragovich's programming was unreliable, and Reznov overrode it for his own mission, which is far more effective on Mason. We see Reznov's programming in the same scene, as Mason recalls his command.
It felt like I was in a dream. Step 2, ascend from darkness. Step 3, rain fire.
Why is Reznov's programming more effective? Well, it goes back to what Dr. Steiner said. Mason has a strong will. Obviously, he's going to be very resistant to the idea of killing his president. But Reznov's goals aren't that far off from Mason's. Mason does want to kill those 3 men too. So, Reznov's programming is able to take root better. Then there's the moment in the tunnels when Swift calls Mason out. We see now why he had this reaction. Mason was talking to himself like a crazy person. I could go on, but I think I made my point. The best twists in stories make everything that came before snap together, like the last piece of a puzzle being slotted into place. Black Ops is the very best video game example I can think of doing this. With Steiner gone, Mason is their only shot of locating the broadcast station. With his mind cleared, Mason thinks deeply. The numbers finally start to make sense. He hears Dragovich's voice. At last, he locates the broadcast.
Where?
Cuba.
One last mission. Mason joins Hudson's unit to strike the ship where Dragovich is broadcasting from. They soften the target via choppers, then drop onto the ship to close in on their quarry. At first it did strike me as a bit strange that Hudson brought Mason along for this op, given his unstable mental state. Who can say if Mason is going to be overcome by brainwashing and do something horrible? But Mason hones in on a secret underground base located below the ship. It validates Hudson's decision for me. Mason's their only link to the broadcasts, so he's a useful asset in the field. The juice is worth the squeeze here, I guess. They raid the underground base, taking out Dragovich's goons before closing in on the man himself. Mason throttles him, but this moment of success is undercut by one unsettling word from Dragovich.
But you turn me! Gets me on! Like to make me kill my own president!
Pride?
One word, one sardonic grin, is enough to put a pit of dread in the player's stomach. Mason finishes the job. His programming by Reznov is complete as well. Kravchenko, Dragovich, Steiner, now they're all dead. He returns to the surface with Hudson. The US military awaits, American flags waving. The music crescendos, and it feels like a very patriotic, upbeat ending. Or it would be, except for Dragovich's words. Even in death, he doesn't seem like a man who lost. He seems like a man who won. A woman sits at a broadcast station. She lists numbers. Numbers we now know correspond to programming, to orders given to sleeper agents. Reznov could strike from the grave via brainwashing. Dragovich can too. November 2nd, 1963. Texas. Mason starts translating the numbers into commands.
10, 2, 1.
Texas.
Kennedy's fateful motorcade. In the game's last photo, we see Mason in the crowd, staring intently at the president. Did Mason do it? Was he Kennedy's assassin? Well, the game leaves it up to you to decide. Black Ops is a game that has constantly given us new questions. Here at its very end, it leaves us one final question, and I think it's the perfect way to conclude the game. Call of Duty Black Ops is a masterpiece. It uses the video game medium to its fullest to spin an intriguing tale that leaves you on the edge of your seat. The constant stream of revelations, plus more questions, creates a hook of satisfaction and newfound curiosity that's irresistible. Black Ops is one of the best stories in any first-person shooter, and I think it's the peak of Call of Duty stories. So after such a masterful entry, where can Black Ops successors go? How can they top what Black Ops did? Well, that's where things get interesting. They don't really try to top Black Ops 1. Each subsequent game takes a step in a different direction. The Black Ops series constantly reinvents itself, experimenting in storytelling with each entry. Black Ops 2 ventures into entirely new territory. But that is a tale for another day. Thank you for watching, it really means a lot that you made it all the way to the end. Please consider liking the video, subscribing, or ringing the notification bell if you haven't already. Also check out my Destiny Final Shape story video if you're interested in more story analysis. I think it's one of my best videos yet. Lastly, if you want to support me even further, please consider checking out the Northfield series. I appreciate you all no matter what. Until next time.